Hi class, this is your instructor, Skylar Huff, and welcome here to the 33rd chapter of your textbook, and this chapter is on plant structure, growth, and development. So as we begin this chapter, I'll take my time, but keep in mind as we have transitioned now to plants, there are more than 300,000 species of flowering plants that live in and are adapted to many of those environments here on Earth. And they represent, class, a remarkable variety. So from desert cacti with those enormously swollen stems to the cattails, partially submerged in marshes, and even to those orchids growing in the uppermost tree branches of those lush tropical rainforests. They are all recognizable as plants. Almost all plants have that same body plan, which consists of these three portions. They are the roots, stems, and leaves. So, keeping those in mind, just note that that's just that basic part of all plants. So, plants are either going to be herbaceous plants or woody plants. To help you discern among the two, or discern between the two, I'll call that herbaceous plants being those plants that have no woody growth. Those are plants that are non-woody, and they have no secondary growth, to be a bit more specific. In temperate climates, the aerial parts, meaning the stems and leaves of herbaceous plants, they die back to the ground at the end of the growing season. In contrast, the aerial parts of woody plants, being those trees and shrubs, they persist. So I would say that those have secondary growth. And botanically speaking, woody plants produce hard, lignified secondary tissues. And that just means that the cell walls of secondary tissues contain lignin. We'll get more to that here shortly. And herbaceous plants contain none, no lignin at all. So lignin and the production of secondary tissues will come up a bit later in the 35th and the 36th chapter. So now I'll just go to how the life history of plants is different. So annuals are herbaceous plants such as corn, geraniums, and even marigolds. And those herbaceous plants, they grow, they reproduce, and they die in 1 year or less, or one growing season or less. Other herbaceous plants, such as the carrots, Queen Anne's lace, which I love, cabbages, and foxgloves, are known as biennials. So use your prefix there. The biennials, class, take 2 years to complete their life cycle before they die, of course. And I'm saying life cycle here. I'm just meaning, of course, flowering and fruiting in these, of course, flowering plants. During the first season, biennials produce those extra carbohydrates, which they will store and use during that second year, when they typically form those flowers and reproduce. And then finally, class, perennials are those herbaceous or woody plants that have the potential to live for more than 2 years. So in temperate climates, the aerial or above ground stems of those herbaceous perennials, such as the irises, rhubarb, which is an amazing taster, onions, asparagus, and even the ox-eye daisies, which you all can see in your textbook on page 710, they die back each winter. So their underground parts, being of course the roots and the underground stem, become dormant during the winter, and then they send out new growth, class, each spring. So in dormancy, an organism just reduces its metabolic state to that minimal level to survive in those unfavorable conditions. And of course, here in coastal Alabama, it gets a bit unfavorable, especially in January. Similarly, in certain tropical climates with pronounced wet and dry seasons, the aerial parts of herbaceous perennials, they do die back, and the underground parts become dormant during that unfavorable dry season. Other tropical plants, such as orchids and herbaceous perennials, that grow, of course, year-round. So let's continue to contrast things, and we'll get right to where we're going. So all woody plants are perennials. Some of them live for hundreds or even thousands of years, class. And in temperate climates, the aerial stems of woody plants become dormant during the winter. So I hope that you know where I'm going. So many temperate woody perennials are known as being deciduous. And the deciduous plants are those that shed their leaves before winter, and then they produce new stems with new leaves the following spring. However, those other woody perennials are evergreen. So they shed their leaves over, of course, I say the entire growing season. And of course, some leaves are always present, so you may not even notice that they're shedding those, unless, of course, you just happen to look down on the ground, such as in the case of course, plants in the genus Pinus. And that's Pinus, such as the pine trees. So because they have permanent woody stems that are the starting points for new growth the following season, many trees attain massive sizes. So here, class, we're going to continue to focus on that structure, the growth, and the development of flowering plants, which are, of course, vascular plants characterized by these. These are flowers, double fertilization, and endosperm, and seeds, class, enclosed end fruits. So now let's get back to where we began, class, with the plant body. So here with the plant body, I'll make this as concise as can be. I'm here on page 711 in your textbook. And with that, let me get my pen ready to go. Just a moment here, and I'm now ready. So the plant body is divided, class, into two systems, meaning it's all because, of course, that root and shoot system. So I'll begin, class, here underground with that root system. So this root system in which I'm describing, class, and yes, that is a tap root. It's, well, I hope you say that's obvious that it's underground in that dark, moist soil. So what happens here with this root system is it's there to take in these resources. And the resources or nutrients I'm referring to, class, are water and minerals. So underground, class, those water and minerals, they must be taken up. And as those dissolved minerals or inorganic nutrients are taken up, they will, of course, go in that up direction to, of course, the aerial portion of the plant. So let's get now, of course, to that second of two systems, being the shoot system. So with that shoot system, it includes the vertical stem, which I know you all can see here. And in addition to the vertical stem, it includes the leaves, which I know you all can see, those leaves. And it also includes the flowering plants, flowers, fruits, and seeds. So yes, that is a leaf, that's there. Here, class, is a flower. We also now see, class, the actual fruit. And then within the fruit, class, are seeds. So the nutrients, class, here for this illuminated portion of the plant, which is within the dry air, is, of course, sunlight and carbon dioxide. So I say again, the nutrients here taken in by this shoot system, part of the aerial portion of the plant, class, they are sunlight and carbon dioxide. So please keep in mind this basic overview of that plant body. So what I'll now get to is that these vascular plants, as they are in structure, and I'm getting into function just a bit, are organized into three tissue systems, and each of which with two or more tissue types. So those tissue systems, class, are as follows, and please take notes well, because on your lecture test, you'll be tasked with describing these three plant tissue systems. So here they go. The first of which, class, is the ground tissue system. The second is the vascular tissue system. And thirdly, class, the dermal tissue system. So to go over these a bit briefly here, I'll state that the ground tissue system, class, functions to photosynthesize, primarily. Also, it's there to store and then to support. Next, the vascular tissue system is what contains, class, that intricate conducting system. So what's going to be moving, class, to that vascular tissue system will be water, those dissolved minerals, class, and it does indeed include, class, food in the form of sugar, and then a secondary, or at least secondary functions, class, would be to strengthen and support that plant. And then now, finally, class, the dermal tissue system is here to provide the covering for the plant body. So those, class, are those plant tissue systems. So next up, I'm getting here to what is known as overarchingly, class. You may have learned before that we, being of course you and I, as animals, as Homo sapiens, have organs? Well, it's not just us that have organs, class. Plants too have organs. For instance, roots, stems, leaves, flower parts, and fruits are organs. And I say that they are organs because each is composed of all three tissue systems. So keep in mind that when I refer to plant organs, it would be those things: those roots, those stems, those leaves, the flower parts, and those fruits. So with that being the case, let's get on into the ground tissue system class a lot more specifically. So the ground tissue system is composed of, I say, the majority of herbaceous plants. So when you look at that herbaceous plant, that plant that has no secondary growth, you're primarily seeing what is called ground tissue. So just think of it in such a way. So they're composed of three tissues, and they are as follows: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. So a quick note about these is that the cell wall structure is what is used to distinguish each of these. And let's begin with what's for you now, class, with parenchyma. So parenchyma cells have a thin primary cell wall. Check it out right there. It's kind of a tan color or even a kind of a green color. So that thin primary cell wall is there, and this is the most common type of cell and tissue. So it's making up what are called what is known as the soft parts of a plant, such as the edible part of an apple or even a potato. So those consist largely of parenchyma. So in function, as you see it there, class, it functions to photosynthesize, to store, and secrete. This is parenchyma. So up next we have collenchyma. So collenchyma cells have unevenly thickened primary cell walls. So if you look closely, yes, that cell wall is there. However, that cell wall is not as evenly thickened as you saw with parenchyma. So with that being the case, this tissue is extremely flexible. It's that structural tissue, and it provides support for those non-woody plant organs. So in this case, I say the individual cells provide plants structure and support. So to make this, I guess I'll say, real to you, and even more real to me, think of those strings of a celery stalk. I don't know if y'all like celery, but I like a little celery in my life, especially with wings. So the celery stalk consists primarily, class, of collenchyma tissue. So as you do eat your celery, I would most definitely, class, say that, of course, take a bite, you all will see strings, and you will especially, class, see those very same strings when we have that lab exercise, of course. Next up, class, is sclerenchyma. So sclerenchyma cells have both primary and thick secondary cell walls. So if you look closely, class, it's a bit different here in that the sclerenchyma. So the secondary cell walls, they become strong and hard, and it's all because of the extreme thickening. So the secondary cell wall that has that extreme thickening, class, is there, and let's get to what happens as it occurs. So to be more specific, class, I'll now get to what are known as sclerids. So sclerids are the cells in the shells of nuts and the stones of fruit. So to think of this, class, think of the cherry and the peach. So the cherry and the peach, class, of those stony fruit, I would hope that, of course, you have not bitten into each of those or even either of those, because you may have hurt a tooth or even come close to losing a tooth. So with that being the case, this does also include, class, the gritty texture of pears, because that gritty texture of pears, class, is gritty because of those clusters of sclerids. So that's why, class, it tastes the way it tastes. And that's maybe also why some may say, ooh, I don't necessarily like eating, of course, pears. So you will see this in lab as well, as we, of course, go through the process of mounting, class, a section of the pear to show you that. And much the same way, we'll do the same, class, with the potato to show the parenchyma cells. So before I get to tracheates and vessel elements, I'll take a moment, class, for cell wall chemistry of those three. So to say it another way, class, the cell wall chemistry of those, of course, three simple tissues, it varies dramatically. So I'll begin, class, with cellulose. So cellulose is that most abundant polymer in the world. You say in the world? Yes, in the world. It accounts for almost class, well, an approximate 60% of the dry weight of plant cell walls. For instance, if we were to take a plant and dry that plant out class in the dryer or in the oven and take that out of the oven once it's completely dry class and take the mass of that, we would get class what is nothing more class than purely cellulose as far as that dry weight. And because it's over half that mass, that of course we'd get. And just keep in mind, class, the monomer of cellulose is glucose indeed. So this next thing up, class, is going to be lignin. I hope that you all remember lignin, class, as this was introduced, class, not long from now. So as I introduce this class, keep in mind that lignin is an important component, class, of secondary cell walls, and particularly, class, in those of wood. It's this that is that strengthening polymer that also is here for conduction and still, of course, has a monomer class of amino acid derivatives. So keep this in mind, class, because if you want to know why wood is as strong as it is, it's all because of this strengthening polymer. So up next, class, I will now get to the vascular tissue system. So there are two complex tissues here. They are known, class, as xylem and phloem. So xylem is what conducts, class, water and those dissolved minerals up from the roots, to the stems, and ultimately, class, the leaves. And thereafter, of course, to the atmosphere, but I won't get there yet. So it provides, as a secondary class function, support, structural support. So to get more specific, class, we also have what are known as tracheids and vessel elements. So the tracheids and vessel elements, class, of such, they are here, and they, yes, do conduct water and minerals. So with that, class, think about the tracheid. The tracheid, class, is dead at maturity, and it has no secondary cell walls. So yes, it does conduct. The vessel element, class, is also dead at maturity. So with this, they're both, class, there to conduct, and they go through the process, class, of apoptosis and are hollow. So when you think of this, it's almost as if you're drinking water from a straw. I know you all have used a straw once over the rainbow, whatever that means. But that's how it occurs, class. The water goes up the plant, and I would say it uses no energy, but we haven't quite gotten to that point yet either. So next up, class, is phloem. So with phloem, class, I wrote down that it conducts carbohydrates created during photosynthesis down from leaves to the stems and ultimately, class, those roots, and it also provides structural support. So we have the two types here, class, known as the sieve tube elements and companion cells, as you all see noted here. So with this, they work in concert, class, to transport food materials. So the sieve tube elements, they are alive at maturity. I repeat, they are alive at maturity. However, they lack a nucleus and other organelles. So when this happens, class, they, of course, will ultimately shrink and disintegrate, whereas those companion cells, they direct the activity and they're linked by plasmodesmata to ensure, class, transportation of those, of course, dissolved sugars can occur, class, and occur efficiently. So from here, class, we'll now get on down to what is known as the dermal tissue system. And if you do look closely, class, the plasmodesmata can be seen to allow, class, efficient transport. All right, dermal tissue system. So there are two complex tissues here, and they are known, class, as the epidermis and periderm. So with these, I say that these tissues provide a protective covering over the plant parts. So I'll now divide things just a little bit. And I'm going to divide it like this because we have those plants which are herbaceous and those plants that are woody. Let us begin. Herbaceous plants have a single layer of epidermis. Herbaceous plants with that single layer of epidermis, class, this is why I would just put it as being they are soft. This is why, class, they are pliable. And since they are soft and pliable, well, it's all due to, class, them only having primary growth, that single layer of epidermis. Next up, I'll get to woody plants. So what's different here, class, is woody plants have both an epidermal layer and a periderm, that woody layer, that outer bark. And this is what makes them class so unique. Now up, I'll get down to the epidermis itself. So with this epidermis class, I'll say that the epidermis class is transparent. I'll repeat, the epidermis class is transparent. It has those unspecialized cells. So given that in and of itself, keep in mind that it's transparent class to allow light to penetrate to the interior tissues, to allow class those interior photosynthetic tissues to go through the process of photosynthesis class by harnessing, of course, those photons coming from the sun, and of course allowing photosynthesis class to take place. So keeping that in mind, it's also that there are guard cells class located on the underside of the leaf. So the guard cells, meaning there are two guard cells, and those two guard cells, which are their class, making up a stoma, allow gas exchange to occur. So I'll stress again that the guard cells that make up stomata, which is the plural, facilitate the diffusion class of CO2 into the plant, and of course oxygen class as well as water vapor out of the plant. So the stomata class are typically going to be open during the day, and as they're open during the day, this class is allowing photosynthesis to occur, meaning allowing that plant to go through the process of taking in the carbon dioxide class. The water has come up class via, of course, that xylem by way of the roots, and along that very same node class, by having sunlight, photosynthesis ensues. Those dissolved sugars class are synthesized, and of course, oxygen is given off as a byproduct, and of course, there is a bit of water too. So, having done all of this, also keep in mind that there are trichomes, meaning those hair-like, or at least looking like those itty-bitty hairs on that upper epidermis. So the trichomes that are their class are just not there for, I guess you will say, nothing. The reason they are their class is that sometimes they can enable that plant to tolerate salty environments. And as they're there to tolerate those salty environments class, they're there to remove that excess salt that may accumulate there on that plant's surface. The very same way class, the trichomes may also increase the reflection of light off the plants, thereby class causing that cooling effect to those internal tissues and decreasing water loss. Other trichomes may have a protective function. For instance, class discouraging herbivory from, of course, animals here and animals there. So next in the class, I'll get to that secreted waxy cuticle. If you look closely, class, the waxy cuticle can be found there. This waxy cuticle class is amazing in its function. And you're saying, yeah, you're my teacher, everything is amazing to you. Well, let's get to just how amazing that waxy cuticle is. So that waxy cuticle class helps to retard water loss, meaning it's efficient. Meaning it's, I would say, one of the many reasons, class, that plants have been allowed to take that and move themselves, class, from being once aquatic plants to now being class terrestrial plants to, of course, having this adaptation to life on land. So this class shows yet again the stoma. So I say it's made up of two guard cells. So there is a guard cell that is here and a guard cell class that is there. Also pay attention, class, to the color being shown. I hope you class do indeed see green. So this the monopore class is there in the center, facilitating class the exchange of those gases. That is carbon dioxide class and oxygen. So flanking a class on either side are those epidermal cells. Keeping in mind, class, that those epidermal cells are there and, look closely, transparent, allowing light to penetrate class through to the photosynthetic tissues within. So from here, I'll continue on, class, to what now is known as the Rederm. The periderm class forms under the epidermis. So this is what begins to provide that new protective covering as the epidermis class is destroyed. And this happens as woody plants increase in girth. I did say Girth, girth. Notice class, the periderm is here, and just deep to what is, of course, remnants of the epidermis. So as I continue, class, this is what will form that outer bark of not just class older stems, but also class those older roots. And I've asked in the past, and I'll keep asking class, if in fact class you have been one to mow a yard and you've mowed and maybe hit something under a tree, you may have very well class hit what is called one of those older roots that is covered class by the periderm. So the next portion we'll get to class is what is composed, meaning of the composing the periderm. So it's called class one of two things, meaning it's mostly cork cells and cork parenchyma. So those cork cells, as you see class here, are coated with what is known as suberin. That's suberin. I'll write it down for you. Suberin. The coated class with suberin. So what suberin does, class, is allows or provides class a waterproof barrier. So this class has been that overview class of the epidermis. So now let's continue on to plant meristems. So as plant cells grow, they grow class in very specific areas. To contrast, we as animals class, we have growth that occurs all over the body, but at different rates. I don't know how old you all are, but at my age, I am noticing class growth in areas that I've not seen growth in times prior. Next slide age. So what I'm getting to here, class, is that meristematic growth class occurs, and when it does occur, it occurs via mitosis, the process, of course, of asexual division. You will learn about this in your first biology course by way of course, if you remember, interphase, and then, of course, after interphase class comes mitosis with prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, or even telophase. So it can occur, class, throughout a plant's lifespan. However, class, let's get to two different types of growth that will occur. And as I do these, just stay with me, class, to make sure it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, just let me know. So I'll begin here, class, with what is known as indeterminate growth. So indeterminate growth, as it does occur, it occurs, class, in roots and stems. So, of course, this shows you all a root here. And I say this because with indeterminate growth, class, it occurs and allows growth to occur throughout a plant's life. So that plant will grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And I'll say up or down. As that is the case with indeterminate growth, determinate growth class is quite the opposite. So in this occurs, class, in leaves and flowers. So to help with that, class, those leaves and flowers, they grow, class, they get a certain size, and they stop growing. And you can see this, class, be evident in the leaves of those trees you may see, and the leaves of trees you've seen today, if you've seen any leaves today, which I hope you've seen leaves today. So it's not that leaf class will get to be 8 feet large. That leaf class will get to whatever size it should be, and it class will cease its growth. So next up, class, I'll get to two types of meristematic growth, and they are known, class, as primary growth and secondary growth. We're here now, class, with primary growth. Primary growth, class, occurs in all plants. All plants on Earth, class, go through what is known as primary growth. So what primary growth does is it increases, class, in root and stem length. So it includes, class, the entire herbaceous plant. So yes, those young, soft shoots and roots, and even, class, in woody plants. So keeping in mind, class, with primary growth, it occurs, class, at apical meristems. I repeat, primary growth occurs at apical meristems. And I'm not just saying that the apical meristem has to be at the top of the plant. Notice this as at that root tip. So with that, class, apical meristems at tips of roots and shoots and buds 2 class is where this happens. So with roots, the apical meristems class are beneath what is known as that root cap that protects that developing root as it grows class downward. And then at the shoot apex and the developing bud, or the terminal bud class, it occurs an even class with what is known as that leaf primordia, as you see indicated class here. So this is that apical meristem class, allowing that growth to occur, and that, of course, will be a leaf that comes thereafter. So in contrast class, we'll get now to secondary growth. So with secondary growth, this occurs in those woody dicots. So woody dicots class are stated as such as being, of course, one of those 2 types of angiosperms. We'll divide them later class into being monocots and dicots, but many times you'll hear me refer to them class being woody dicots. So the second group of plants that secondary growth occurs in class is the gymnosperms. So when you think of secondary growth class, think of class the woody dicots as well as the gymnosperms. So what secondary growth class does is it increases class the girth of that plant. Secondary growth, I just drew that arrow there class, it increases class the girth of the plant. And I'll draw it now class in red, and maybe that will stand out more. So, of course, this includes that woody, of course, and that bark. So to continue here, secondary growth class, as it occurs class at what are known as lateral meristems. I'll say again, secondary growth occurs at lateral meristems. All right. So there are 2 types of lateral meristems. They are known class as the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. Those 2 class in and of themselves are responsible for secondary growth. So those secondary growth tissues, think of those as being, of course, the secondary xylem as well as that secondary phloem, and that does indeed include class the periderm. So I'll begin with the vascular cambium. So with that vascular cambium class, it includes those meristematic cells that form a thin, continuous cylinder within a stem and root. So if you look closely, class, that vascular cambium is denoted right there, that thin, continuous cylinder between that wood and the bark. So as it's written, class, the division of cells of that vascular cambium is, of course, what adds more cells to the wood, or to that secondary xylem, and, of course, that inner bark. So when you think of that secondary xylem, or that inner bark class, think of everything, and I'm going to change my color to something that may show up quite well. Let's go orange. This, that's called the inner, that's there. This class is every bit of that secondary xylem. And pay close attention because we'll go over this to make sure you understand, and you'll also see it in lab. But as I've written it, class, it's the division of these cells of the vascular cambium that adds to those cells for that secondary xylem, that, and of course that inner bark. So I'll go to that inner bark, and I change my color here just a bit, and I'll go to a lighter blue. So when I refer to that inner bark or that secondary phloem, I'm referring to what we are seeing right here, going around, of course, this that you see. And secondly, let's go to what is known as the cork cambium. So the cork cambium class is that thin cylinder or the irregular arrangement of meristematic cells. So this is in what is known class as that outer bark. So cells of that cork cambium, as they divide, they also will then class form those cork cells on the outside. Hello, making it waterproof. And then, of course, we have the periderm, meaning the cork cambium, the cork cells, and the cork parenchyma. Those 3 things. So to kind of make this class make a bit more sense, I'm going to do this here. That's the purple portion I'm referring to. And each of which class do make up the bark. I repeat, each of those, they do indeed make up class what is known as the bark there, as you see me circling. But I'll put it this way, class. I'll call it bark, meaning bark and all those plant tissues, meaning bark, is that all the plant tissues we have, class, outside of the vascular cambium. I'll say it again. To make it simpler, class, and I like to make things, I say, simpler to understand, I would say that bark includes, class, everything that is outside of the vascular cambium. So if it's outside the vascular cambium, class, for our purposes, it can be referred to as bark. So this class has been the 33rd chapter of the text. Make sure for your test you are appropriately prepared, class, to describe in both structure and function these three types of plant tissue systems. So the day of the test, you would turn this in written form along with what it was assigned, class, from the 29th chapter, which was, class, for you all to describe both the economic and ecological, class, importance of fungi. If you have any questions for me, please do not hesitate to contact me. This has been your instructor, Skylar Huff, and thank you all for listening, taking notes, and paying attention.